Hi, writers. Welcome back for another day of realistic fiction writing. This week, you have reached the final stretch of writing a realistic fiction series. Last week, you really focused on writing up lots of books, and by now, you might have 2 or even 3 books in your realistic fiction series. If you've taken the time to write anything more, that's fantastic. But for right now, you should have focused on revising your books that you've already written and editing your books so that they're ready to go. Because writers, you have reached the final stage of realistic fiction writing this week. And today, we're going to be talking all about chapter titles. So, writers, today I want to teach you that fiction writers often break up their stories into chapters. One way they do this is to break their story into 3 parts. They think about the beginning, the middle, and the end. And when you think about the beginning of the story, it's really the start of introducing what's going to happen. When you think about the middle of the story, that is when the trouble or the problem starts to happen in your story. And if you think about the ending of your story, that's when you're fixing the problem and wrapping it up so that your readers feel satisfied. So I want you to think about how you can break up your story into 3 parts. That's the first step. After you think about breaking up your story into 3 parts, you're going to come up with some short and snappy chapter titles. So you have to think about what happens in that chapter, and then you're going to give it a chapter title. Don't worry, writers, I'm going to give you some examples. Here's a story called Mr. Putter and Tabby, Turn the Page. Mr. Putter and Tabby is a realistic fiction book series very similar to Henry and Mudge and Junie B. Jones. On this first page, it shows you the title page and who it's illustrated by. It even gives a little blurb about what the story is about. I don't want you to worry too much about this page yet. Well, when you turn the page, the next page in this book is the chapter title page. And on this page, you will see that there are 5 different chapters in this book. Chapter 1 is called Reading, Chapter 2, A Mistake, Chapter 3, Gusto, Chapter 4, Storytime, Chapter 5, Book Swap. After the chapter title page comes the beginning of the story. Chapter 1 is Reading. And then these chapter titles really break up the story into some smaller parts. This is a big overview of what it could look like when you finish writing your chapter titles and putting it into a full book. Let's take a peek at how I planned my chapter titles in the book about Kit and her mom planting the garden. Now, this is the book that I've been showing you as my example, but you should have at least 2 or 3 books written for your series. That means the same character, but new adventures. So I actually used some Post-it notes to plan out the beginning, middle, and end of my book. And when I was thinking about the beginning, this is going to begin on the very first page. I thought about what happens in this chapter. Well, Kit's waking up. She has breakfast at the table with her mom and asked to go planting that day. They go outside to plant in the garden, and they plant beautiful tulips. So I'm planning the beginning of my book saying that Kit is going to go plant a flower garden. And a short and snappy title that I came up with is Spring Has Sprung. So using a Post-it note, I planned where the beginning of my book is. A few pages later, I used a Post-it note to mark the trouble that starts happening. When the trouble starts to happen, this is the middle of my story. The trouble started to happen when Kit and her mom went inside for lunch and the fuzzy brown bunny hopped down to the flower garden. I decided that a fun title would be tulips everywhere. Because first, Kit and her mom do plant tulips everywhere. But as the story goes on and the trouble keeps happening, we learn that Bunny decides to chomp on the tulips, and that also makes them go everywhere. So the middle of my story is where the trouble happens, and I give it a short and snappy title. Now moving on, this is a newer page that I wrote, and Kit and her mom go back outside and find the bunny in the garden. This is still trouble happening. Nothing has been solved yet. By the time I get to page 7, the last page in my book, I'm really thinking about how to end my story. How am I going to solve the problem so that the readers feel satisfied? I mark this with a Post-it note by saying this last page is the end. And I name this chapter Munch Munch because you're going to learn how Kit solves the problem so that Bunny feels satisfied too. This chapter title is called Munch Munch. Using these Post-it notes to plan the beginning, middle, and end of my story help me better decide what page it would make sense to include a chapter title. Planning for chapter titles. The final step to making your chapter titles very official to get ready for publishing is by completing a chapter titles page. You'll notice that on this page it has the title, Chapter 1, Spring Has Sprung, and the page number where the reader can find it, page 1. Tulips Everywhere, page 4. Munch Munch, page 7. So after you use your Post-it notes and decide the beginning, middle, and end of your story for your chapter titles, you can complete the chapter titles page that will go at the beginning of your book. This page goes before your writing. Okay, writers, so today you have a big job to do. You're going to be planning chapter titles for all of the books you have written so far. You're not going to do a ton of new writing today, but you are going to label the beginning, middle, and end of all of your books that you have written. That means your first book, your second book, maybe even your third book. And you're going to create chapter title pages so that you can begin to get ready for publishing this week. Okay, writers, off you go to write. And don't forget, you have a big toolkit at the end of this slideshow if you need a little refresher on what we've learned so far. I also added in chapter titles and how you can create those in your stories today. Off you go to write. Have a great day of learning.